Welcome. We are so glad to have you all here tonight joining this very, very important call. My name is Julie Womack. I am with Red, Wine, and Blue, and I want to bring up my uh, cohort here from Moms Rising, Donna. We want to welcome you all to this event tonight about immigration enforcement in schools. Donna, I'll kick it over to you, and you can introduce yourself in Moms Rising.
Thanks, Julie, and thank you everybody for being here. You are all amazing, and it's so uplifting to be together. I'm Donna Norton, Executive Vice President and the founder of Moms Rising. Moms Rising is a movement of moms and the people who love us to advocate for increasing family economic security, decreasing discrimination, and building a nation where everyone can thrive. And like many of you, I know how integral immigrants are to our families. My mother actually was a refugee from China. My kids' first beloved childcare provider was an immigrant. Their pediatrician was an immigrant. Half of the staff at the assisted living community who are caring for my father right now are immigrants. So that's not unusual. Immigrants are integral to our families and communities. And it's time for us all to stand up for each other and make sure that we all know what we can do, whether we're immigrants ourselves or we want to support immigrants in our communities. That's why we're joining today here with Red, Wine, and Blue and the NEA as parents, caregivers, educators, and students to discuss how the current administration's immigration actions connect to their overall attack on public education, ways we can strengthen safety for our students and communities, and ideas on what we can do to ensure every student can thrive in our schools. And I'm going to turn it back to Julie to get us started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Donna. For those of you who have never joined a webinar or an event with us before, my name is Julie Womack. I'm the head of organizing with Red, Wine, and Blue. We help engage and empower women across the country to defeat extremism in their communities. Extremism like what we're going to be talking about tonight with immigration raids in our schools. So Red, Wine, and Blue has over 600,000 members across the country. We have 700 local affiliated groups in all 50 states. And one of the things that we love to do is to educate people about important issues like what we're talking about tonight. Because, well, the most powerful tool that we have is our voice. We can go out and share this information with our family, our friends, our neighbors. We can talk to them about how issues are going to impact their lives. And most importantly, get them to take action and get them to the polls to vote for common sense candidates. So I know that we can agree that no matter where we come from, no matter what we look like or what our background is that we believe that all kids deserve an education. And more importantly, they deserve to feel safe and welcomed in their schools because they are not going to learn if they are living in fear. And we know that right now, there are certain sets of politicians who are using kids as political pawns to drive an agenda, which is basically to increase their power and to disrupt public education. That's why we're coming together tonight. Donna talked a little bit about what we're going to hear from our panelists. We have a great lineup of people coming to speak to you. So right now I am going to bring up Angelica, and she is going to give us a little bio on some of our speakers we're having next, and I'm going to let Donna go.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Donna. My name is Angelica Castañón. I am with the National Education Association, and you will be hearing more from our folks this night. We have Stephanie and Shilpa and Stacy here who will speak a little bit more towards the end. And so right now, I'm happy to introduce the first section of the evening, and this is hearing voices from the field. And our panelists for this section are Judy Gonzalez Martinez, and I'm going to read her whole bio because she's an amazing, amazing educator, and we could all learn a lot from her. And just perk your ears up and hear what this woman has done. So, Judy Gonzalez Martinez is a third-generation Latina from a migrant Mexican family. She has spent 34 years in public education, largely in California's Central Unified School District. Growing up in a large, close-knit family in the 1960s, her upbringing in a small California town instilled values of dedication, hard work, and advocacy. Martinez has dedicated her career to uplifting students and educators, focusing on social justice and education. She spent 21 years as a newcomer and English learner teacher and served for 10 years as president of the Central Unified Teachers Association, during which she helped diversify the school board. Currently, she is the community schools coordinator at Teague Elementary, where she was pivotal in obtaining a significant grant in 2022. Additionally, she chairs the California Teachers Association Fresno Madera Service Center and contributes to state and national education policy. Martinez holds a bachelor's in education from California State University, Fresno, and is a proud mother of 2 children. And my other distinguished guest tonight, we are so lucky, Wilmari she left Puerto Rico at just 16 years old to pursue her education at Wingate University, determined to build a better future in the continental United States. 2 weeks before graduation, she secured a job as a bilingual call center representative, demonstrating her unwavering dedication to success. With nearly 20 years of experience, Wilmari has built a career centered on bridging language and cultural gaps in organizations that serve diverse communities. Currently serving as the Director of Development for Habitat for Humanity in Cavadas County, she has consistently leveraged her bilingual skills and cultural competency to create meaningful connections and improve access to resources. Passionate about language accessibility, she advocates for accurate translations, yes, please, that empower individuals to navigate systems effectively. She believes that providing materials in one's native language does not hinder learning English, but rather enhances understanding and engagement. Amen. So these 2 amazing women will be asked questions by Julie here, and so please enjoy the show.
Thank you so much. I'm going to take you down from the screen there. All right. Well, I am so excited for this conversation. Really, really blessed to be here to hear from both of you. So I'm going to start with you, Judy. Can you share how increased immigration enforcement in school has impacted your students and the families in your community?
Well, I'm sure, as you all know, that this has a lot of our families scared, and that's putting it mildly. I teach at an elementary, and so what we've seen there, and in reaching out to a lot of the families, and in our schools, all of our schools, we have what we call family outreach liaisons. And what they have communicated is that parents don't want to come to any of our events for fear that there could be immigration present. Students don't want to come to school because they're scared to leave their parents at home for fear of coming home and not having their parents at home when they get there. And I reached out to our counselor to ask how some of our students, and of course, when they meet with our students, it's very confidential, but just said, how has it been affected? She said, I can tell you this. I'm gonna read what she said to me because it was powerful. She said, I'm not hearing a lot, but the actions speak louder than the words. And by that, she means that the families are truly worried about it and don't show up to school. They're too scared to ask anyone for help, and they don't want any attention drawn to them. So it makes it really hard for us to know who's impacted. But as I said previously, we have family liaisons at our schools, and they have done really a great job in our district to reach out to these families. And we don't know about their backgrounds, or some of them may, right? So that has really helped because we are connecting with them. So, but you can imagine in the high schools, they had immigration that weren't at the schools specifically, but they were in the area and they saw them at our school at Teague. We had an aide say they reported that they saw a Homeland Security car. And so you can imagine how that escalated their fears and their anxieties. And of course, you guys are all reading what's happening nationally with our students. So the toll socially and emotionally, very difficult to actually put into words, because every single one of them it's very different, but it is definitely impacting them, and you see it and you feel it.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Well, Mari, can you tell us as a parent, what has the impact been on these policies for your family, for your kids, for their feeling of safety and well-being at school? Um, we'd love to hear your thoughts as a mom, dealing with this issue.
Um, well, I came from Puerto Rico, right? So I'm documented. Um, so I might not have the same fears. But I'll tell you how I reacted. My daughter has a copy of my birth certificate. My boss has a copy of my birth certificate, and every single one of my friends has a copy of my birth certificate. Because I I fear that by me being out here advocating or even speaking in Spanish to somebody, that I would be targeted. My daughter is bilingual, my high schooler is bilingual. So we had the conversation of like, hey, you might not have that issue, your mom might not have that issue, but you have plenty of friends whose parents might have an issue with documentation. I was just like, and they don't have to be Hispanic. They can be of any type of any color, any race. So we had a conversation about, hey, be very supportive to your friends. You don't know what they're going through. You know that you can give your friends my number. Give my number to their parents. So it's just really hard conversations like that. But I think what impacted her the most was when I sent her my birth certificate and I was like, please keep this on your phone just in case. You never know what could happen. Um, but also what I don't even know if impacted me was the word, because I kind of felt a little embarrassed about it. It's like people tell me, well, at least you don't look Hispanic. And I,
Mhm.
it worries me, things like comments like that, because I mean the only reason I have blonde hair is that's hair dye, so it's that's not the right position to take. Well, I can't open my mouth. I mean, I might not look it, but if I open my mouth, they're gonna hear it. Um, so it's that constant worry of like, do I sound too much Hispanic? Like, do I look so much Hispanic? Like, am I gonna and just like Senora Martinez said, I mean, I'm trying to stay under the radar. Like, I don't even though I don't have the documentation issue, I'm still an immigrant. I'm still Hispanic. So it's just it's very worrisome to me. It's scary, honestly. I cried a lot, because this is the life that I chose. And I think one of the things that maybe if I have time to say is like, us immigrants, we chose this life. Like, this was a complete choice that we made. We could have stayed in our countries forever and ever. Um, but for me, I would see movies in English channels and I was like, well, you know what? That's the life that I want. I want the life of that and just like everybody, we in Puerto Rico we call them American people. So I was like, I want the life of that American people. Like, I want to live over there. So this is the life that I chose. Like, this is the country that I love and the country that I want to stay in and that I want to raise my kids in. Um, so it just hurts me because us immigrants, we're not criminals. We are purposely trying to stay under the radar. We're not speeding. Like, I am in cruise control even in the city streets because I don't even want to be pulled over. I got pulled over for a brake light the other day and I freaked out. I was like, oh my gosh. So I don't know, just if you take anything, this is the country that we chose to live in and that we love. We love it just as even sometimes I'm like, maybe am I honestly, when we go back to our countries, we're not like right now, I'm not Puerto Rican enough to be Puerto Rican, but I'm also not American enough to be American. So it's like, it's living kind of like in that limbo right there.
And you mentioned when we spoke that your family is not even speaking Spanish in public right now. Um, just, I'm sure is that something you've had to have a conversation with your children about, your daughter about, or is that just something that you've been like, well, we just know we can't do this now?
We're just kind of more conscious about it. We didn't really have the conversation, but we're just more conscious about it. And I, it's more like I feel like all eyes are on me if I speak to her in Spanish or but I want them to be bilingual because there are studies that say that your brain grows. I don't even know how much. I can't. I don't know the correct terms. There's probably more smarter people in this call than I am, but your brain, I don't know how many more sizes it grows when you know two languages. And so I want them to be bilingual and I want them to feel comfortable. And at the same time, it's a little scary. I also have mixed daughters, so my daughters are mixed. They're darker skinned than I am. So sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, are they going to be more targeted than I am even? So it's just it's also the fear for them, as well as for me.
Okay, so for both of you, we'll start with you, Judy. Because of these rules or these policies, what emotional or academic challenges have you observed among students who are facing the stress around immigration? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. As I said previously, if they're scared, they're not coming to school. And so everyone here knows that that affects their grades and what they're learning. And when they're coming to school, they're not just learning, but some of them have connections with their teachers, with their friends. They're getting a meal. They're getting cared for. Many of them are enrolled in what we call our extended after school program. And if they can't have that, because I mean, I think we all know how COVID affected us. We weren't able to socialize with our friends, with our families like we're used to. That's what's happening to them right now, which is it's just uncalled for. But their fear is replacing them wanting to go to school. And so yeah, so grades obviously are affected, right? They're separated from their teachers, and all of that takes an emotional toll on them. This is no different for these students than, like I said, during COVID, because they felt like they can't be there because their fear is overtaking them wanting to come to school. And maybe it's not their fear. Maybe they do want to go to school, but their parents may also be scared to send them to school because of what might happen. So, and especially in elementary, they're a little younger. And so that separation anxiety is real. I mean, we have that anyway in the lower grades because, they love their parents. We see the separation anxiety when we have winter break and our spring breaks, right? And they come back to school and it's like they're so used to being at home with mom and dad. And so it's the same thing, right? They don't want to be separated from their families right now for fear of what they're hearing. It's all over the news. It's all over social media. And if they're not watching it or hearing it on social media or the news, their families and their parents, they're talking about it. And so they're picking up on it. So yes, it greatly impacts them. And I will say it impacts our teachers too, because um, they feel for their students and they don't know what to do. So right now, we are making home visits ourselves, and we've always done that in our district, but we're making it more of a concerted effort to make home visits if we think that that is what's impacting them, to not keep them away. Another example is we have a food pantry. Our food pantry is amazing because it's not, here's what we have to offer you. They actually get to go shopping in the food pantry and choose what they want. And they've set it up like a mini store. But the parents, so we have these days, the food pantry is going to be open on this day from this time to this time. So guess what? They don't want to come for fear of that. So our district was awesome and they said, you know what, appointment only. Call this number if you need food. And so they have to make an appointment. Nobody knows when they're coming. And so it's open at all times whenever they can come. So that is something that they've done. But if they're not eating, you can imagine how that affects the child as well and their families. So it's a trickle down effect across the board.
I would be curious, Lamari, you're obviously your daughter's a citizen, so how though emotionally or challenging academically, because I'm sure there are friends, there are people she knows in school who are facing those fears of going home and their parents being gone, or even worse, like people coming into the school building. just curious how that's impacting your daughter or her friends, what your thoughts are. And it's okay if someone's in the background. This is all, it's all cool.
I have a 4-year-old and a 15-year-old. So the 4-year-old is the one is the one saying on the on my side. So there's this is it's, it has been a year for my family, so I'll preface with that. So I also survived cancer last year. And I tell you that because my daughters already had a fear of me not coming home. Because I would get sick and then I would go to the hospital and then they would keep me and then I would be gone for a couple of days and then would come back. Um, so they've affected, I'm not sure if emotionally or educationally. Hold on, let me tell my daughter something. Hold on just one second.
Or there's a lot of moms on this call. We are totally cool with that. Don't worry.
Actually, I love that's happening. Actually, it's life, right?
Yeah, it's life. So I think just their anxiety has kind of heightened. My daughter has a really amazing support system at school. Uh, she has an amazing group of friends and an amazing group of professionals at her school that I've communicated with, and just my fears and things like that. But I do think that they're just more anxious about everything. I mean, I've never asked my daughter to keep my birth certificate in her phone, and that's something really real that I did. But like I told her, I said this is something that I can't help. Like I can't help how people perceive me. I can't help that I speak Spanish. Like I can't help that I work nonprofit or that I want to help. But what I can help is I can give you my birth certificate in case something happens to me or something, like you have that on your phone. My boss has it in her phone, like my friends have it. Um, so I do think they're more anxious about things. But I think approaching them with that side of love and and explaining them that privilege that they have, that we are documented, but that not everybody has that privilege, you know, that it has definitely made a difference, but they're definitely more anxious. My daughter constantly checks on me. I mean, there's always been that Life 360 joke that teenage daughters check on their moms, but now it's like it's really real. Like she checks on me and she checks and sees where my phone is at all times. So I haven't seen that academically she struggled, but she does have a really great support system. But my point for people is like not all the kids are lucky enough to have that great support system and all that. So I mean, anxiety is definitely through the roof.
Absolutely. Judy, let me ask you this about educators. So what have you've talked a little bit about home visits and some other things. So tell us a little bit about like how is this impacting school staff and what strategies are they using to try to help students? You mentioned home visits. Would love to know more about what does that entail? What are they trying to do there?
So if students aren't coming to school and we realize that maybe it's different than before, we're trying to connect with them. And whether we make the phone call home, and so if they're not answering, we're trying to figure out why. So to get behind like is it because of this? And if so, how can we help you feel safe at our school? Our counselor, when she found out about this, she came to us and said, "Hey, have you heard about these red cards? We need to get behind it." And me, because I'm the community school coordinator, our family liaison, we said, "Already ordered, already on it." We've got them in all these languages, and so we're getting this information out to our parents. And I think that that's important that our parents know that they have rights and that we aren't letting anybody come to this school and take their child. We know what to do. We're not going to let them pass the doors. We have gates. We have to buzz them in and they have to come to the office. It's not going to happen at this school. It's not going to happen in our district. Our district, as I said, was very proactive. And I think many schools in California were like this because of the information that we got from California Teachers Association and from National Educators Association. They made sure that we were ready for this. And so they educated us. And so that's what we're trying to say to our parents. Don't worry, when your child is at school, you are protected. This is not happening to your child. And I think we've done a pretty good job of doing that. And even though they saw the Homeland Security cards or the immigration, maybe cars going by, okay, we educated them to say this is happening. Our district had educational meetings throughout the district. And as I said earlier, some of them may not have been there, but word gets around. Like I said, our family liaisons at our sites do a really good job of reaching out. And parents, you know this, they talk to each other. The kids talk to each other. So having these in the front office at our school in the languages that we predominantly have in our school, having the educational forums that we had to let them know that not in our district, not at our school. They're not getting through. We know what to do. Your child is safe. That helped a lot, significantly, I will say.
I'm
So,
glad to hear that the
answer
teacher.
your question?
Yeah, no, it did. And I'm glad to hear that the teachers feel that they have the training and the knowledge and that they know what their rights are. 100%. I'm going to get into the last question here.
Absolutely.
What gaps exist in the support systems at school, like that need to be addressed? Is there anything you've identified that, well, this is a gap, this is something we really need to work on or figure out a way to address?
So I think the main gaps would probably be, and I think this is the same for every school district, is not having maybe enough of the supports. So if a child is acting out, and maybe it's because they're fearful, they're acting out in a different way. It's very difficult when you only have one or two counselors at your site to work with that child. And so there isn't enough time in the day to work with them adequately. Most of them need that one-on-one. And even though they know that we can refer them also to someone else, most of our families, especially in the tight-knit communities that we have, and I would say that for most of our schools, they trust the teachers, they trust the people there because they know them. So it's hard for them to go outside. So any gaps would be, and again, this isn't just because of this, but it would just be that not enough personnel to go around to adequately serve our students in the needs that they need emotionally, and socially. Yeah, that would be it. So I think, like I said, the home visits that we started implementing ourselves, even though our district does them, I think is going to help getting them to trust us even more and to come to us. How can we help? We did a home visit today, as a matter of fact, and the parent had nothing to do actually with this, but just voiced that their child didn't want to come to school for a certain reason. And we just said, we're here for you. Help us. If you need counseling, we can get it for you through the school. We can refer you to somebody. So I think that would be the largest gaps, actually, is just not enough of us to go around so our families and our communities know that we are here for them.
Okay, well, thank you. I know we're at time here, and we're going to bring up our legal experts next to talk about what rights are for teachers and families. Angelica, I'm just going to bring you up just to kind of do that introduction, if you don't mind turning on your camera, and I can get you up here real quick. I want to make sure we're getting the right people. Thank you so much. I'll have you introduce, and I appreciate you and Wilmari coming on and sharing tonight. Appreciate your time. So we will kick it over to you, Angelica.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Judy and Wilmari. So next we're going to hear from National Education Association's Stacy Hickox. Stacy is out of our Office of General Counsel, and this section is the legal considerations and know your rights. All right, I'll pass it on to Stacy. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. As she said, I am an attorney with the National Education Association, and I am a mom. My kids are grown, but I still consider myself a mom. And so I apologize, but I am going to use some slides. So I'm going to go ahead and share those. But I think this is the best way for you to get the information tonight. So one thing I did want to point out is, even though I am an attorney, don't consider this to be legal advice, because oftentimes, especially in immigration situations, it really depends on a specific situation. But I am going to try and give you an overview of some things that are important to know with respect to immigration and the rights of students and educators. First of all, you probably already have heard that there were a lot of executive actions that have come down since January 20th, and I won't belabor this point, but you should know some important ones, including, I saw someone mention in the chat, the threat to take away birthright citizenship. That has been challenged and it's been enjoined for the time being, but that has been proposed by this administration. And what that means is that if you were born in the United States, it's always been true that you were a citizen of the United States, but that's being challenged. There's also all kinds of other measures that are trying to be implemented to keep people out of the United States, including suspending all applications for asylum and suspending many of the refugee admissions, and also expanding expedited removal of people who are already here in the United States. The special status for people from Venezuela and Haiti to come in and stay in the United States has been revoked. That also has been challenged in courts. And then also there was a lawsuit brought by the Department of Justice against sanctuary cities. And some of you may be in a sanctuary city where they have agreed to not cooperate with ICE in their enforcement of immigration statutes. State law enforcement is not required to cooperate. And so many sanctuary cities have said, no, ICE, if you want to come in and enforce immigration standards, then you can do it yourself. That's being challenged by Department of Justice going after those sanctuary cities. And so that too is in the courts. But we're not done. So there's also a proposal for a national registry of people to be able to track them, more vetting of people who are seeking to come into the United States. And we've heard that there is a long list of countries that are going to be on the new ban. You probably remember the Muslim ban from 2016, 2017, and a new list is coming shortly, we understand. Another challenge has been the use of Guantanamo Bay to hold people who have been apprehended. That's also being challenged in court, and I understand that most people have been taken from there and brought back to the United States. The Department of State has put out a memo talking about permanently banning visas to people who are trans and not giving them access to visas. There's been a direction to ICE. Someone I saw mentioned in the discussion about quotas. Supposedly each ICE officer has a quota of 75 per day, and I have heard too that that quota is not being met. Refugee resettlement has been threatened. Some of you may be in cities that have these services available for people who are coming from other countries. Funding is being threatened for those services. But with this long laundry list of executive orders, what I want to stress to you all, first of all, is that executive orders are just simply the position or the opinion of the executive. They are not statutes in themselves. They're not even regulations. And so a lot of these proposals, like taking away birthright citizenship, for example, is in the Constitution. And so the president can't just sign away those kinds of rights. And so some of what I'm going to be talking about to you tonight are some of those rights that cannot be changed by executive order. And that's why there's so much litigation challenging everything that's been proposed in these executive orders. So one of the most concerning things for us at National Education Association and for many of our members is the fact that this administration has changed its policy on where ICE will engage in enforcement actions. Since 2011, and really before 2011, there's been a long-standing policy since 1993, really, under different names, saying that the Department of Homeland Security will not carry out enforcement actions in certain locations. And in that memo, schools, hospitals, places of worship have all been considered to be sensitive locations, meaning that ICE should not be carrying out arrests in those locations. Now, there were some extreme circumstances where they could. So, for example, if they knew that there was a dangerous person who was in one of these locations, they could go ahead and take action. But otherwise, they were expected to stay away from those areas. Day one of this administration, they revoked the sensitive locations memo and instead decided that ICE agents would be able to use their own discretion and common sense, if they have it, to decide where those enforcement actions would take place. And so they could take place and can take place at all of those sensitive locations now. There's been 3 different lawsuits filed challenging the fact that this memo was withdrawn, one by a group of religious institutions, and they have been successful in getting an injunction to stop enforcement in religious places of worship. The Denver Public Schools bravely also filed a challenge to the removal of the sensitive locations protections for public schools. They were denied a temporary restraining order for that action in schools, but that litigation is still ongoing. So, and we're hopeful that the result will be favorable to remove schools and return them to being sensitive locations. But for the time being, all schools are subject to ICE's enforcement actions. So that raises the question, is this administration carrying out mass raids, and can they do that? Especially, can they do that in schools? You probably know from the past Trump administration that these raids have occurred in all different places, a lot of workplaces and some other areas near schools were subject to actions in the past. We have not heard about a lot of enforcement action at school, but a lot of that has to do with the fact that schools are better prepared this time. You heard Judy already talk about that, and the fact that schools know that they do not have to let ICE in unless they have a judicial warrant. And so that's what's been happening. There's a very powerful video of the Chicago public schools keeping ICE agents out of those schools to engage in enforcement just a couple of weeks ago. Someone asked if there's been any stops. There was one bus stopped on the border near Texas, but that was at a kind of at a checkpoint, but it did include high school students who were on that bus, and ICE did stop that bus. Oftentimes raids occur, at all different hours. Oftentimes they do not have judicial warrants. And that's important because anyone is required to adhere to a judicial warrant, meaning something that is issued by a court or a judge, but they are not required to adhere to what is called an administrative warrant that is put out by ICE. And so an important thing for schools to do, and we'll talk more about this later when we talk about creating safe zones, is that there needs to be someone at the school that can tell the difference between a judicial warrant and an administrative warrant so that they know whether or not people are required to follow that warrant or not. So you will see at the end of my presentation that we have developed Know Your Rights materials, and so I'll tell you how to get those. So that's one thing that you can do to respond to these actions, is to educate yourself and educate anyone that you know that might be willing to learn what needs to take place to protect everyone against these types of raids. And one of the most, I saw someone mention flyer already in the chat, but it is important to know people's rights. And one of the most important rights that applies to the situation is the case of Plyer versus Doe. This is a case dating back way to 1982 that said that any child in the United States has the right to a free public K-12 education. It doesn't apply to higher ed, unfortunately, but for K-12, any child has the right to an education, and that includes any children, regardless of their documentation status. And so what that means is that states cannot charge for a child to attend school because they're undocumented. States can't take away funding for schools that educate undocumented children, and neither can the federal government. You've heard a lot about the funding cuts from Department of Education, but they cannot do that based on a school's decision to or obligation to educate undocumented students. Another important legal protection is FERPA, and you've probably heard of this. You've probably had to sign FERPA waivers before. FERPA stands for Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And what this says is that no one, including an ICE agent, can have access to a student's educational records without the parent's permission. Now, some districts disclose directory information, but one thing we encourage is that districts do not include any kind of identifying information about someone's status or their place of birth or any kind of information like that in that directory information. And it's also important to know that families can opt out of those directories as well. It's important to know that the district needs to enforce FERPA, and so that means that they should not be turning over educational records without the permission of the parent or an adult child. And they should not be including any kind of immigration information in educational records of that student. And they should not, as I said, should not be placing the place of birth in that directory information, and make sure that parents do know that they can opt out of that directory. So if they do feel uncomfortable for any reason to be listed in that directory, they need to be informed of that. And then most importantly, the district should not release information that's protected by FERPA unless the enforcement agent prevents a judicial warrant, not just an administrative warrant that sent ICE on it. One thing that we've seen is the targeting of both students and teachers. You may have heard about the student at Columbia who, even though he had a green card, he was arrested and not deported yet, but he was taken from his home. And so this has been done under the name of combating anti-Semitism, which, you know, I have no problem with combating anti-Semitism, but it does not mean that the federal government has the right to disregard people's rights, and that includes their rights, whether they're an immigrant or whether they're a natural born citizen. So this seizure of students, including Mahmoud Khalil, is being challenged under the Constitution. He has Fifth Amendments against unreasonable search and seizure, and he has a right to equal protection under the 14th Amendment. Again, another reason for these people being seized is their exercise of their right to free speech. And that too violates the Constitution, to take someone into custody just because they have exercised their rights of free speech. The other thing I would point to is that there is a risk, even if someone has not committed any kind of criminal act, some schools are taking action against the student with respect to suspending them or expelling them. That could cause them immigration problems, because that could mean that they would lose their student visa. So one thing you want to talk to your school districts about is to make sure that any kind of, you know, enforcement of their student code of conduct doesn't result in a student losing their visa status. So our other speakers from NEA are going to talk more about passing a safe zone school board resolution, so I won't belabor that, but that is an excellent way to make sure that a school district is providing for these rights that I've been talking about. So enforcement of PLILR and those rights, and the rights under the Constitution and under FERPA. So what should someone do if ICE shows up at a school and they have not adopted a safe zone policy? Well, anyone that has the ability to interact with ICE, they want to make sure that they don't just make decisions about what rights that ICE agent has. They should be referred to someone who does have that authority, whether it's the superintendent or the school's general counsel, somebody that can decide whether or not those agents have the right to enter the school and to search records and so forth. On the other hand, no one should be involved in physically interfering or obstructing an immigration officer, because you can rest assured that these ICE officers will turn on that person and charge them with interference or obstruction. And again, keep in mind that under FERPA, that ICE agent or any kind of enforcement agent needs to have a warrant, a judicial warrant, in order to obtain information about any students, including undocumented students. So a few other things that a school district can do, or even a community group can do, is to try to partner with pro bono attorneys or immigrant rights groups who can provide this kind of information and even more in-depth information for families and students, and also to be available if someone does face some kind of enforcement action, that they can be referred to this kind of legal help. Because as I mentioned at the beginning, immigration questions are complicated and tricky, and so you need to have experts available to help these families. Make sure that families have their emergency contact information updated with the school, and as was already mentioned by our earlier speakers, make sure family members and friends have that kind of information available. Have a protocol. So what's going to happen if, for some terrible reason, the family member is not there to pick them up? or the caregiver is not there to pick them up, what's going to happen to that child? And then also think about adopting policies either at the school level or even at the local or state level that prohibit schools from collecting immigration information about students. That's being proposed, for example, in Tennessee right now. And so keep track of that and make sure that your state isn't in the business of collecting that information when it's really not necessary for providing an education for that child. So lastly, resources. So here's the website that has these resources. Here's the QR code. You can scan that. So we have resources available. These are a whole host of different resources on immigration issues applicable to education and students. And then we also have a guide that's specific for higher education. So if anyone's involved in higher education or you have students who are in higher education, you might want to check out that special guidance as well. And with that, I am going to turn it over to my colleague from NEA, Shilpa Reddy, and she's going to talk more about ending or counteracting some of these actions.
Thank you, Stacy. Hi, my name is Shilpa Reddy. I'm with the National Education Association. I work in our Center for Racial and Social Justice. And I just want to thank you all for having us here this evening. It's been great watching the chat and my fellow presenters here this evening. Especially want to thank Judy and Will Marie for their sharing their stories and what is happening on the ground with their families, with their communities, and what they are doing to really challenge what is happening to our families, to our students, to our educators on the ground, and being in community with folks. So I want to speak a little bit about what we can be doing together, and I know that was a lot that we've heard. So I just want to talk a little bit first about NEA, National Education Association, and just to let folks know, as many of you probably know, we do represent educators across the country, and we've been doing immigration justice work for a really long time because it not only impacts our students and our student populations, but many of our educators, whether they are DACA educators, whether they come from mixed status families, whether they have been helping people in their community who might be undocumented for years. We have been, we want to be there and have been there because we know the importance of immigration work in public education. And as Plyler, we didn't need a Supreme Court decision to tell us, but educators are very clear that we are going to help kids learn no matter what. And our public education system, although not everything we want it to be, it is something that we strive for. And so there are communities across the country where educators work with kids from all different backgrounds, all abilities, across race, place, genders, and we're going to continue doing that. But we understand that this is a very challenging time. And for us to be impactful, we really believe in the theory of change that I think many of you, as part of Moms Rising or Red, Wine, and Blue, know that we have to respond to the needs of our communities and our fellow families and students and kids in our communities. We need to identify clear organizing targets. Y'all are all organizers. I see over 400 people on this call. Every one of you is an organizer. Every one of you is a communicator. So that is part of this theory of change and why you are here. And so that is why we are here to help in any way we can to offer resources, best practices that are going to help you in your own communities. Because as I was saying, immigration is a central pillar to pro-public education. Not only does it align with our union values, but it also has always had the potential to engage communities around the value of public education for our students and our communities' abilities to grow and thrive. Public schools have always been the center of those communities, and our immigrant populations are part of those communities, and we welcome them as we welcome any other student or family into our spaces and places. And we know what has worked to mobilize for change, and continuing to come together in spaces like this to develop and implement resources and tactics on the ground to support each other and families is what is so important. And right now, we know that immigration policy is a contested idea in our government. The current administration wants us to fear immigrants. They want us to cheer the use of extrajudicial enforcement in order to keep us divided from each other. All while they are moving, we know their agenda, their mass corporate tax cuts and advantage their billionaire backers. So when they attack immigrant students and educators, they intend to divide communities, to fight for what we're already fighting for, which are resources and the best schools and the best resources for all the schools. They want to keep us divided so we keep fighting for those scarce resources. And at the same time, they encourage the privatization and profiting by their right-wing friends and allies. It's very clear what their agenda is, and they're doing it by pointing the fingers, having us pointing the fingers at each other rather than coming together. So we know for this to work, we have to embody and embrace a full-throated defense of immigrant students and their families. So this is not only good for immigrant families and the students, it's good for all of us across the board. And it's a fundamental value of school communities. So we are going to be coming together, and we're not going to let them allow us to point the fingers at each other, blame each other, fight for scarce resources when we know why they are coming together to do this. So what we're doing with the NEA and with great partners like Red, Wine, and Blue and Moms Rising, which we're so lucky to have been working with groups like these for several years, is that we're building our muscle through our work in the movement for immigration justice with groups like yours. And we are going to do that in Congress, at the White House, in state capitals, in the courts, and in the streets, and in our school buildings. So we are here to continue to learn from our allies and to bring our expertise to the table, but to continue the conversation. So I just want to say thank you all for having us here to do that. And I just feel like we all need to take a bit of an exhale right now. There was a lot that we've heard, and we need to take a beat and kind of check in with ourselves, because I think as we all have seen what's happening around us and the attacks on our freedoms and our kids and the tearing down of these public institutions, it's critical that we respond by setting and cementing our own agenda. And we do that by using proactive and thoughtful narratives and storytelling that are led and driven by our values. Our narratives should respond to the opposition's intentional division and distraction, because uncontested, their story gets to stand. They get to continue having an us versus them. Crime is coming in, get people out of our schools. They're taking up all of our resources. Unless we have our own proactive agenda and our proactive storytelling, their story goes uncontested. They get to frame the debate, us versus them. They get to animate their side with those stories of the need for exclusion and and not welcoming everyone, and that and immigrants are ruining our country. Whatever their narrative is goes uncontested until we stand up with our own stories. And that's their strategy, right? They want to paralyze all of us into inaction, with cynicism, with inaction, to be overwhelmed. What do we do? We can't do, something's coming down every day, every hour. But we do not have to fall into that trap, because we know that that is their intention. They want to overwhelm us, but we know that we have the right resources, we have the people, and we have the energy to get out there and do this. Not every day. Sometimes we feel can feel very cynical or even defeated, but I think that coming together in spaces like this, that's why this is so important. And so I want to show you an example of how we can take control of a narrative to mobilize for change with an ad. But these are the couple of things I'm going to be going through today. The narratives that mobilize, which we're going to see an example of in a second. We're going to talk about some actions around policy change, especially the safe zones that Stacy had mentioned. And then we're going to talk about some actions around solidarity. But first, I want to show you an ad that I hope that you can see how we can change the narrative here. We can get that. We'll show that later if we can. But it's an ad that really shows moms with their kids and talking about, there's the background of the song You Are My Sunshine, which is universal, I think, for folks. And it talks about how we are all families and that we are going to do what we need to for our kids and for our families. And it really changes the whole narrative to mobilize us and to really bring us to a place where we are telling our own stories. Because I think in the next slide, you'll see that what we really want to do is like tell our own stories to make meaning of our world and what's happening in our communities. I've seen so many folks in the chat talking about what's happening in their own communities. And there are a lot of data sets. Look, I work for the education folks. We have a lot of data, we have a lot of numbers, and we throw those out there when we can, when we need to, when we're on Capitol Hill or in state capitals. But when you were talking to your neighbors, your friends, people at church or at the temple or at the grocery store in line, what really moves people, and this, we know this from research, is like really telling stories of what's happening in our schools, in our communities, whether it's Judy telling stories, what's happening in her school, what we're seeing in our own backyards, in our churches, and what we see in our local news, but also how we see people coming out to help each other. These are the ways that we can set our common narratives that will then help us set our policies. And what we do is we want to ground our narratives and our strategies in ways that empowers us all, that unites us. Look, everyone's got 99 problems and they don't want one more, right? So what we open with when we talk in our conversations are, we describe a vision of the world or the communities that we want to create, ones that welcome all students, ones that are inclusive, ones that have books for every student, that look like every student, that talk about all backgrounds, all races, all genders. That's what we want to open. And that's how we want to open our conversations, to ground our stories on the vision of the world that we want to create, that we want to see, that will make our values, which are welcoming schools for all students, where they can learn and thrive, and where their families are welcome. We make those values tangible by our visions. And we do that, and we say that we will do that by coming together, and that we're going to do it, no exceptions. Nobody's going to be accepted from that. Everybody's welcome. We're going to make sure that we're going to stand for everyone, because it actually makes all of us stronger together in our communities. And so I'm going to just go through a couple of ways to do that. And one way that we can do that in our next slide we'll see is through safe zones. And so safe zones policies, back in 2017, we at the National Education Association, along with General Counsel and along with a lot of partners around the country, developed the Safe Zones policy, which was then passed in school boards, hundreds of school boards across the country, to combat what was happening. We've gone through this before, and we'll get through it again. So this was what was happening in 2017. And so in response to that, so many school boards across the country passed these resolutions, and you're going to find them in the resources that we'll be getting to folks after this call, where school board, and there's a template. You can take that template, you can work with your community members, with your own friendly school board members to make that what fits your community. And it really sets the policy for the schools in your school district by saying the things that Stacy was talking about. It dealt with collecting student immigration information and making sure that we are affirming that all kids have the right to attend a public school via Plyler. It can have procedures for responding to immigration enforcement. One of the best things about these resolutions, when you pass them, you pass the one-page resolution, but the second page is the actual policy that so many schools actually posted in their school office, so that if ICE were to come on to the school property, there is a policy. And so you're not putting a school secretary in a bad situation of having to read a warrant. Like, they're calling in the district, they're coming in, they're making sure that nobody's going anywhere until this policy is adhered to, and that everyone is there, that they understand what is happening. And I will tell you, with some of the places that passed these in 2017, 2018, ICE comes on to a school property. They see that the school or school district has a very clear policy of what happens when they come onto their grounds. They're turning around and they're leaving. Or they're thinking twice when they know that school districts have passed safe zone policies. So we have updated that from 2017. You can find it. We'll have a website for it. We have templates. You can download it. It doesn't have to have the NEA's name on it. It will have your local school district's name on it. It will have the actual policy. So that is just something that I think, as you all get together in your communities and talk about it, that you can actually pass these. I will tell you one story from Omaha, Nebraska. We had some local educators pass the school safe zones resolution in 2017. And after January 20th of this year, there were calls to that Omaha school district asking what was going to happen with the immigrant kids in the school districts. And the superintendent said, hey, we passed a school board resolution in 2017. That thing is still in place, and we have a policy. We are a safe zone in our school district. So I will tell you, it's important. It's something that can be done at the local level. There's a lot happening in Washington, D.C., but what's really going to make the change and protect ourselves, our communities, our students, is what's going to happen in your communities and in your school districts. So in the next slide, we'll look a little bit at what the procedure is. You'll get these slides, I think, but it's really some of the things in a safe zone procedure could be that they have to go to the superintendent's office for review. There would have to be FERPA regulations would have to be very clear. The superintendent's office is going to have to request the judicial warrant, not the administrative warrant, the names, the reasons. The legal counsel's going to review it. They can bring in the school district's legal counsel. All of that can be happening. And that is why I think when it not only will make the educators and the students feel safer in that school every day, it will make the community know it's an act of solidarity, right? The community came together and said, not here. That's not going to happen in our school districts and in our schools. You're going to think twice before coming on to our school grounds. So I know someone in the chat had mentioned Tennessee. We've been working with them, and yes, they're probably going to be passing a law soon in the next couple of weeks that's going to make it permissive for school districts to start asking for the immigration status of their students, and then perhaps either charging tuition or not allowing these students onto their grounds. And what we're going to be doing, and what we've already started doing with organizers in Tennessee, is to make sure they proactively pass a safe zones resolution in that school district, so that the permissive bad law that has been passed would not be passed in the school districts. You've already stood up in solidarity to say, we have safe zones here. We don't need to be asking kids about their immigration status or charging them to go to a public school. And I'm pretty sure that what's going to happen, and I think we've said that, and someone said it in the chat, it is ready to be challenged at the Supreme Court. Plyler will be challenged at the Supreme Court. But what's important up until then, with all of our legal friends who are going to be fighting to make sure Plyler remains the law of the land, is that we as community members and as parents and as educators and as students are standing up in community after community to show the social proof that we are here and this is not going to happen, and this is not what we want to happen, and this is not our community, this is not our state, this is not our country. So I really would encourage folks to take a look at the safe zones, the templates, how to work with the school board. I think people here can talk to each other. All of you are organizers and can do that. We also have folks at the NEA and at our state education associations who are reaching out to folks and working in coalition with immigrant groups, with parent groups, with student groups to do this. And so we really want to make sure that we get the word out, and hopefully you'll be able to do that too. Our next, in the next slide, I just want to talk a little bit. We've talked a little bit about this in the chat, I know, and we've gotten the link out to folks, are more of the solidarity actions. And one really is the red cards. There's a link here and people can get it. So many different languages of the red cards. We've been giving them out at different conferences that we've had. We also have encouraged folks to put them in, at their community, if they're community businesses that will put them out. Many school buildings, as Judy said, in the offices will put them out. Some schools might not allow somebody to put red cards out. That doesn't mean you can't put them out, at the farmer's market on Saturday, or at the library, if the librarian's able to put those out, or just to give folks the link to that, to the red cards. They're free. You can print them out. These are our rights if ICE were to come to our school or to our work. And one of the things that I learned I was in a training recently with some other union members across the country. And, when there was a raid a few years ago, they all pulled out their red cards, whether they were immigrants or not. And that's what you do. Everybody pulls out a red card. When someone walks in a room and says, I want the immigrants on one side of the room and the natural born American citizens on the other side of the room, everybody all stands together in the middle of that room. That is what solidarity looks like. That's what everyone holding up a red card looks like. That is how we as communities can stand in solidarity. It is something to see, and it is something that really makes a difference. And it shows people who might be too afraid or fear that they can't come and stand with folks. They know that people in their community are doing that. So really encourage people to take a look at red cards, get those out, and let people know what they're for. And so that is one thing. And the other thing that we're going to be sending some information out, we're just launching a new campaign called Opportunity Grows Here. And these are postcards. They're not online. We're really going back old school here with real life postcards that folks can order for free, and we'll send them to you, and you can get your friends or your family or your book group to do a quick postcard. And these postcards are going to your local school district members or your superintendent. And basically the postcards are going to say, look, whatever happens like Stacy said, an executive order is not the law of the land. These postcards are going to ask and make sure that your local decision makers, your local politicians are upholding what is happening, that all kids are welcome in school. Look, Plyler is still the law. All kids are guaranteed an education, a public school education. So these postcards will be like, hey, school board members, hey, Mr. or Ms. Superintendent, we want to make sure that you are showing that your commitment is to make sure that all are welcome in our schools, no matter where they're from, what language they speak, what gender they are, who they love. They are all welcome in our schools. And we are asking you as community members to stand up and to show what solidarity looks like, what our communities look like. These are just some photos that we've taken and had people send in to us from different places across the country where they've used quinceañeras as a place to organize for bringing Texas families together, where they've done art builds in Wisconsin and in Indiana, across the country. And so this is what solidarity looks like. This is what we can all do together. We're going to have a link that Julie's going to send out to get the postcards. You can go online, order the postcards. We're going to start mailing those out. They're beautifully done art there. And then you can just sit with some friends and family. They're going to come in packs of 25, and you can just address your local school board or your local superintendent. And we are just real excited about doing that with our educators, with our parents, our families, with students. I think a lot of students are really going to get into that. They're the ones that we've been seeing at school board meetings that are standing up. We have a lot to learn from them and their fearlessness because they really understand how being together is what's gonna get us. There are more of us than them. And I think that having all of you here tonight is just, one way to show that for us, we say our schools power our communities and our communities power our schools. So really want to thank everyone for joining us today. And I'm going to pass it over back to Julie. Thanks.
I'm very excited always to bring up Julie Collins. We're the Julies. We do all of Red, Wine, and Blue events. So Julie has been taking your questions from the chat, and she is going to ask those, and I'm going to bring up the rest of our panelists as well. And I know there was a lot of questions, so we may not be able to get to all of them, but Julie's the master of combining and trying to get everyone's questions out there. So I'm going to bring up the rest of our panelists.
Yeah, so you were just talking about the red cards, and someone had a question about should ICE never get a hold of the red cards?
I mean, I'm sure ICE agents have seen them. I think maybe what that advice was is don't give it up, right? I mean, you don't have to hand it to the ICE agent. You can just simply read it to them or show it to them. I've heard of even people, passing it under their door. If ICE knocks on their door, they just put the card under their door and don't even open the door. So yeah, but I think maybe what the advice was, I can't speak for another attorney, but maybe what the advice was is you don't have to give up your card to the ICE agent, right? You want to hang on to that to use it in case you need it again.
Well, and I know that it was stated that they are in lots of different languages, which is wonderful. But someone asked a really great question. What about parents who are illiterate even in their native language? Or is there any provision for that?
Well, then they could show the card to the ICE agent, right? So yeah, if someone has explained to them what it says, then they can still use it by showing it to someone else.
And then this was asked a couple times, is the government still submitting green cards for people who were in the pipeline starting in January of 25?
I'm not sure. I would sincerely doubt that much processing is going on, considering with all the layoffs and everything else that's happening.
And so then what can people do in areas where school districts announce that they will not or that they will be cooperating with ICE, I'm sorry, and they will be cooperating with the sheriff? What are the, kind of provisions and things that they can do?
So I'll let Stacy answer as well. But one of the things, I think, they still have to show a warrant, right? You still have to show the judicial warrant. You still got to ask these questions, even if you're cooperating with ICE. I don't know what that, that could mean, like you let them in the door. But I think that what is our responsibility is to make sure that those superintendents are actually following the law that is currently the law, which is judicial warrant, which is FERPA. You don't give up the information, the student information. Like cooperating again it's a way to like really chill and put fear in people that, oh, ICE is now coming in and we're saying yes to everything. ICE can maybe cooperating doesn't mean that the law is still not the law and that people still have to follow the law. So that is where I think parents that can come to the school and let people know that they know the law and that they want to make sure that people feel protected if ICE were to come on to the campus. I think making sure that your school leaders know that and that you're watching is very important as well, and that you are standing with the educators and the teachers that are in that school to make sure that the law is that everyone is guaranteed a public school education K through 12. So that is where we're going to stand. And I think that, but I do understand, and I've been working with a lot of states and localities that are having, that are in conservative areas where they are very much putting the fear and the chilling effect onto schools and communities. But it just takes a few parents that come and speak up at the school board meeting that actually passes safe zones. Even if you can't pass the safe zones resolution the first time you get to a school board meeting, doesn't mean you can't talk about it, doesn't mean you can't have a meeting with your school board member and show them the template and just get it into the conversation so that people know that we are standing up for our community.
So if the ICE agents are not, or the feds are not following the law, who has jurisdiction to do something about that? What do you do if they literally are not doing what they're supposed to be doing?
Well, I can try to take a stab at that. So one thing you can do is Department of Homeland Security does have an inspector general. If they haven't been fired, I know Trump fired a bunch of inspector generals, but I don't know that he fired the inspector general for Homeland Security. And that's the person that's supposed to hold them to their legal responsibilities. And you can file a complaint with the inspector general for the Department of Homeland Security. Of course, the other thing you can do is bring a private action against the government. You know, if your civil rights have been violated, then I would encourage you to talk to an attorney or talk to National Immigration Law Center, for example, or talk to NEA if you're an NEA member, and think about bringing an action. But the simple thing to do is you can file a complaint with the Department of Homeland Security. I think going back to the cooperation thing, I would just make the point that even if the district or your sheriff's office or your police department has agreed to cooperate, that doesn't mean that educators in the building or staff in the building have to cooperate, right? And so they don't want to be resisting, right? I don't want them to get arrested or what. But on the other hand, they don't need to cooperate. And so I had college professors ask me, well, do I need to let them into my classroom? And I was like, well, no, when I was taking college classes, you didn't let anybody in your classroom unless they belonged in the class, right? So no, you don't have to cooperate to that extent. And in fact, you may have an obligation as an educator to follow, your duties as an educator, right? You keep your children safe, you keep the students safe. And so you don't have to cooperate. And so the other thing I would just mention is you can look on the Department of Homeland Security site and find out who has signed these cooperation agreements. And if you're wondering why schools do this, there's money involved. So that may explain a lot.
So someone brought up the question about the birthright citizenship. If that's taken away, how many generations back are they going?
I have no idea what the theory is. I mean, the Supreme Court decision goes back to the 1800s that said that birthright citizenship, I mean, it was in the Constitution, but the Supreme Court case clarified that it was something guaranteed under the Constitution. So I don't know how that would work. It would just be chaos. Hopefully the Supreme Court is not willing to go to that extreme.
Has there been a drop in school attendance nationwide due to these actions of ICE and the feds?
I don't know if we have statistics. Do you have statistics on that?
So I
think I
reached
saw. Oh, go
I
ahead.
reached out to our district superintendent to see if we had data for that just in our specifically district, and I didn't get a response yet, but I can tell you, as I said previously, that in speaking to the parents and the students, that some of them, yes, that is why they aren't coming to events that we have had. They may be coming to school now because they do feel safe at our school, knowing that we have their backs, literally and figuratively. However, it does take a toll on them. So I can't, I don't have the data, as I said, but I would imagine that yes, that attendance has significantly, it has an impact on our attendance.
Yeah, we've been hearing, from anecdotally from members and educators. I was talking to a educator from Mesa, Arizona last weekend, and she said half of her school, the kids are not coming in. So You know, as we collect that data again, you know, I think we're going to see more and more of that.
I would imagine school districts that have school boards that aren't diverse or have not passed this safe school resolution. Our district has, thankfully, and actually updated it after this new election to include immigration rights. But if they haven't, as some of the people in the chat are saying, I can imagine that absenteeism is probably increased in their areas. Yeah.
So what do you do when ICE actually does have the proper documentation, a judicial warrant, and they're coming to take a student? What protocol should be followed for the administration? Should parents be called? You know, all those kinds of things. So what should be done if they actually have the proper documentation?
So I'm just going to answer for if this happened in our school and they have it, I would be calling our district and saying they need to handle it. Wouldn't even let them past our desk up front. So our students are not impacted or affected, and calling the district and said, you need to deal with them. And refer them to them. And I'm sure our district would come and send somebody and not let them through. I can't even imagine that happening, considering the laws that we have for a free and public education. And we don't have any rights. We can't give them any information. So if we don't have that information, how can they have that information? That would be my first question, right? How do you know this? And again, we shouldn't probably get in their way, because I'm not gonna be a bodyguard, right? But at the same time, we're not gonna let them through the gates.
Right,
So
I agree. I mean, it needs that, even if it's a judicial warrant, it needs to be examined by someone who has the ability to interpret it. Because
absolutely, yep.
Because even if they have a judicial warrant, it doesn't necessarily mean that FERPA is, it falls under a FERPA exception. It has to be an exception to the rule that the records remain private. So say they came with a warrant and said, oh, we want to look through your records and see who
Nope.
is, you know, has a name that sounds like they might be an immigrant. No, they can't do that. They need to have specific warrant looking for specific information, and then perhaps they have the right to it. But that needs to be examined by, you know, say your counsel for your school district, someone with that expertise.
Yep.
I want to ask about middle schoolers, because they were in 1st through 3rd grade during the pandemic. I want to know, how can people who are not in schools, you know, kind of maybe help provide emotional support to kids? And that piggybacked on another question. You know, there are a lot of us, you know, myself included, who have grown children. I think one of you said that you had grown children. You know, what can we do to help out, you know, in these instances, help out at the elementary level and the middle school level? What can we do?
Well, I would first reach out to our school district to see if they have online courses. We have online schools that was born out of COVID. And so they can sign up for that. We also have independent study where our students are meeting with teachers one-on-one. The teachers are doing the teaching, but it's not every day. But those online courses specifically they are meeting with their teachers. And the teachers are working to make sure that the students are getting the education that they need. And I think a lot of districts established that during COVID and have continued it because there is a need. We have a lot of students who are, for health reasons, have to be out for several days, weeks in some cases, cannot be around other students. And so I would first look into that. But again, I'm in California. I know there was a chat that said, where are you from? I'm in California, so we are probably a little bit more progressive than some of the other states, but that doesn't mean that they can't happen in their state. So I would definitely advocate for that. And NEA can definitely help you advocate for that if you don't have that.
So are school administrators really backing everyone up for the most part? Or do you have places where that's not happening?
I can only speak for our district, and I feel that they are, yes, absolutely. Again, but we have a school board resolution. We have a very diverse board, and they are 100% behind that. And so, yes, in our district, but again, I can't speak for every district. And again, I'm in California, so we are.
Well, I think and one of the ways, Judy, I think that for places that where you're not sure if they're going to stand up for them or not, one of the ways I think is to, again, go to the school board meetings, but also these postcards. I think when you can put, the name of your superintendent and their address, and you're asking them to stand up to the commitment of making sure that every child is included in their school. When they get 25 of those on one day and they're like, what's going on out here? Or when people are dropping them off at their offices, I think, having that, making sure that people are watching them and understanding, like, we know the law here. Are you making sure that you're going to uphold and have the backs of our educators and our students and our families? And I think that is a way that that really shows, and it's local. I mean, you might know your local school superintendent and see that person on a day-to-day or at the grocery or wherever that might be. So just having that person and that school board know that the community is standing behind folks and are watching, I think is very important, and understand what the law is as well. I think that is really going to be helpful in even the places where you might not know if they will, or even if they might be hostile. I mean, there's still people that have to answer to their communities. So I would really encourage finding creative ways to do that. There are other, having, when you're at the farmer's market, or like having you can just like pull people together into these conversations and give out red cards. And, when they see that in their communities, I think that just is very powerful. And, and finding out there's so many communities, especially I'm from the South, and have been working with the folks in Tennessee, like they have like the most knowledgeable on the ground immigrant coalitions that come together, and have been, not just around this election, but before this, on how they serve immigrant communities. And it's just it's a great place to like just pop in and say, hey, what's going on this Saturday? How can I help? Or, I want to sit in on a Know Your Rights presentation, anything like that. Like, most communities have immigrant coalitions that you can find, and whether it's Facebook or online or wherever. And I think that those are good ways of finding out, and again, coming into coalition and community with those folks.
Well, we are at time. I'm going to kick it back over to Julie.
Thank you for our panel. That was just amazing information. Donna, I will let you close on the end here from Moms Rising.
Yeah, well, giant thank you to all our amazing speakers. That was so inspirational. And just to reiterate, we don't have to be experts in immigrant rights. We have amazing materials from the NEA and other organizations. I'm going to put a blog post in the chat. You can just like find somebody at your school or in the school district that you think is sympathetic, and ask them about how to move forward with this. So giant thank you again to Julie and to everyone for being here tonight. It means so much.
Absolutely. And I hope you all feel reassured to know that there are so many groups out there that are working on this issue. You've heard from 3 organizations tonight with NEA, Moms Rising, and Red, White, and Blue, but there are many, many more out there working on this. There's so many resources. And we really appreciate you joining us tonight, and hope to see you again at another event with one of our organizations soon. So everybody have a really great evening.
Take care.